Colleagues, time flies between AGMs. They say it's when you're having fun. And partly time does fly for that reason for me, because I really love this union. And 3 years in, I love the job that I do in the union and continue to be honoured to do it. But the time mainly flies in because so much goes on. So much is packed into the 12 months between AGMs, and this year's been absolutely no different. We've been active on so many fronts in so many spaces, and at staggering speed. We're a union that takes every possible opportunity to push forward on the objectives that you, as AGM delegates, democratically determine, and that means we barely stand still. EIS office bearers, LE secretaries, reps and activists the length and breadth of Scotland, and EIS staff in all departments of the union, all staff groups, admin, organisers, specialists and coordinators, area officers, national officers, officials will have stories to tell of how they are striving to do their best on behalf of the union, which of course strives to do its best on behalf of teachers and lecturers and pupils and students across all sectors of Scottish education. We're all very, very busy people. And we strive too to contribute to the efforts of the wider trade union movement here in Scotland as part of the STUC, in the wider UK as part of the TUC and internationally. We're an outfit of many parts in our own right, and at the same time, we're part of a large and complex internationalist movement. And while we have a broad strategy set by this sovereign body of the EIS, which is the AGM, we operate in a fast-changing and unpredictable political, geopolitical and economic environment. And we try hard to not only keep up, but to be on the front foot where we can as well. So we never stand still and we never stop. And in preparing to speak to you today, I looked at my calendar as a bit of an aide-memoir as to what I've been doing as General Secretary to support the work of the EIS nationally, at UK level and internationally, while being supported all the way, everything that I do, I'm supported all the way by brilliant EIS colleagues across all departments of the union, and not least Lee Meakin, my PA, who makes sure I'm in the right place at the right time and that I'm aware of the purpose of me being there. And mostly it works, so I'm just going to do a bit of a sense check on that. This is Aviemore, this is the 179th AGM. Yeah? Okay, good, tick. But I'll give you a quick rundown of just some of the things that jumped out from my diary from the last 12 months. I'll take you back to last June, all the way back to last June, when disputes were still raging over pay and jobs for teachers in the school sector and in FE. Just after last year's AGM, we were still pressing for a pay deal for teachers, so had numerous pay-related discussions and negotiations, trying to get something over the line in time for the 1st of August settlement date. Now, it didn't happen, we all know it didn't happen, but that wasn't for want of EIS pressure. And it looks like this year, despite all the work put in by Des Morris, our salaries convener, and Assistant General Secretary Stuart Brown and National Officer Terry Gray to pin them down, it looks like COSLA and the Scottish Government are sailing close to the wind again, spending more time behind the scenes, sparring with one another, than putting everything they've got jointly into making a credible pay offer to Scotland's teachers. The teachers' side claim for 6%, undifferentiated and above the rate of RPI inflation to continue pay restoration for teachers couldn't be any more straightforward. And of course there's room for negotiation on the figure that we finally settle at, but COSLA's initial offer of 3% was way off the mark, and everybody knows it. A below RPI inflation settlement would take us backwards, not in the forwards direction that we need to go if we're to build on the modest ground recovered through last year's pay award that COSLA noted in the letter of offer was, quote, a first step towards restoration in the value of teachers' pay. That was a bit of a win on principle for us in last year's settlement, if nothing else. We had an extended joint chairs meeting earlier this week at which no offer was made, with time ticking away towards the end of term. Colleagues, this shouldn't be hard. The claims for 6, 3 was rejected, RPI's at 4.5, primary 4 could work out what a possible settlement figure could be, and between them, the Scottish Government and COSLA could fund it if the will was there to do so. We're under no illusion about that. But, colleagues, I digress. This is June 25, I think, yeah, 25, and I'm going back to June 24, when the Glasgow consultative ballot for industrial action against cuts to teacher numbers closed, with members indicating strong enough support for action for a decision to move to a statutory ballot straight after the summer. All systems go across all relevant EIS departments to prepare for that. EIS staff and organisation, membership and comms sprung into action. And at the same time, FELA were still pushing for a pay deal and fighting college employers on deeming of wages for carrying out ASOS. Absolutely disgraceful. We had a big rally outside the Scottish Parliament with the FE Minister firmly in the frame. We had speeches and community singing of a demo song or two that I wrote. They were really good songs and the singing was magic, but by the end of June, still no improved pay offer to college lecturers in Scotland. So preparations were made for a fresh statutory ballot over the summer holidays to renew the mandate for industrial action. More systems go across the same departments, plus FE, to prepare for that too. So it was a busy enough June when we got to the close of AGM business last year. And that was followed by a very busy July that saw travels to Houston, Texas for the Vice President and I as we attended the American Federation Teachers Convention. International guests had been invited to swell the attendance at the convention as a display of defiance against the state's pro-Trump Republican administration as campaigning for the presidential election ramped up. Kamala Harris addressed the convention, and what a contrast to the man who's recently ordered the closure of the Education Department of the federal government of the USA. Regardless of any other matters of political difference with Harris's politics, she was sincere and straightforward in her acknowledgement of the value of education, the value of teachers, and the value of teacher trade unions. Colleagues, there are political actors on both sides of the Atlantic who would do well to take a leaf out of the Kamala Harris Book of Education and Industrial Relations. Onwards from Texas to Buenos Aires, where the Education International World Congress was held and where the EIS delegation was actively involved. I was a panel contributor at the Women's Caucus focused on gender equality within the trade union movement. And as well as giving an overview of women's equality in the trade union movement in Scotland, I gave an outline of how the EIS has made gains on women's representation over the last decade or so. Sisters stepping up, brothers stepping back, brothers encouraging sisters, sisters encouraging sisters. And I said, for all that, we've still got some work to do, and that we will always have to keep checking our gender equality dashboard, fingers at the ready, so that we can shift the dials as we need to, so as not to reverse gender equality gains that we've made over the past 10 years in respect of women's representation in our lay and staff structures. And that's a job for all of us. The other seminar that I contributed to focused on the challenges of tracking education spending. The EIS, like many other education unions internationally, has a real wrestle with the opaqueness of financial information provided by national and local government on their education spend. But despite this, we've actually done a pretty good job. David Belsey has spent days of his life over the past few years mining the publicly available data to try to track the spend on education, to help us put pressure on government, local authorities, colleges and universities regarding their particular spending decisions. And that's borne a lot of fruit for us. But we're upping the ante even more, and I've just enlisted the services of the Institute for Public Policy Research to help us do that job even more strongly. They're going to cost the key elements of the Stand Up for Quality Education campaign: class contact reduction to 20 hours, class size reduction to 20, including the teacher numbers required for both, and including the teacher numbers required to restore the numbers of qualified teachers in early years. They're also going to cost sufficient ASN provision and free school meals for all children and young people in our education system from 3 to 18. Because every single one of those is an essential ingredient of a high-quality education system. IPPR are going to research the evidence internationally from countries that do invest well in these things, because they understand the importance of proper investment in education in the present, not only because of the immediate benefits that investment brings, but because of the long-term societal benefits and savings, actually, that come from that investment too. So that work with IPPR has already begun, and we expect to have the final report on all of these issues by the end of October, when we'll then finalise our own manifesto based on that research for the purposes of the next Scottish Parliament election. So a big, big piece of work that's already in train. But I'm going to go back to last year's EI World Congress. The President and I also spoke in the main debate, Alan on education funding, as he talked about yesterday, and me in support of an emergency motion calling for an immediate humanitarian intervention and compliance with international law in the face of widespread starvation in Gaza following Israel's Rafah ground invasion. I spoke of the EIS's stand for human rights, for workers' rights and for children's rights, as well as for peace and justice for the people of Palestine. And I said, if we don't stand up for these rights, who will? And that question remains as live today as it did way back last July. With the atrocities in Gaza having reached new and previously unthinkable depths of inhumanity, and the UN saying just a couple of days ago that Gaza is worse than a hell on earth, as a union, we'll keep speaking up no matter what the efforts are to silence us. We'll speak up for an end to the annihilation of a people. We'll speak up for justice, and we'll speak up for a just and lasting peace for as long as that peace takes to come. August saw the start of a new academic session and the continuation of the FE dispute, with a fresh mandate having been won to continue the action. As one of the STUC delegation meeting with the First Minister, I put the FE dispute at the top of my agenda, pressing the FM on the prolongation of the dispute, the new academic year starting with more strikes, sadly starting with more strikes. And I pressed on the need for a pay settlement and for Scottish Government intervention on deeming at long last. So the First Minister, as you might expect, played his cards very close to his chest, but did say he would look at the deeming issue. And a couple of days later, we got an invitation to meet with the Minister, and EIS FILA President Anne-Marie Harley and David Belsey took up that invitation, and building on all that the FILA negotiators had achieved, and the strength of the strike mandate behind them, and a £5 million strike fund pledged by the EIS main body, they pushed hard for an improved offer, and very shortly after, that improved offer came. So on into September, final details were negotiated, and well done to the FILA negotiators and to Gary Ross, who supported their efforts. That deal was put to members with 90% accepting, and critically in that package, we secured a win on deeming, with every single penny of pay deducted by employers from members carrying out legitimate ASOS to be paid back. A brilliant landmark victory. A brilliant landmark victory for the EIS FILA, for the EIS, and for all trade unions that organise in the public sector. And it's worth us bearing in mind the significance of that victory, considering what you're going to be asked to vote on later on today. As we always say, a victory for one is a victory for all, and that is absolutely the case in this instance too. And for the last 9 months, we've had something like peace in our time in FE. But funding cuts to the tune of 17% since 2021 mean that the fight for the future of further education isn't nearly over. This is really only a pause in the fighting, with EIS FILA regrouping ahead of the next battle. And as with the last battle, the EIS main body will be right there with you when the time comes. I want to give you that assurance at EIS FILA in that continuing fight. Back to last September, I was unable to attend the TUC Congress in Brighton, but made sure that we still moved the first composite of Congress on the end of the hostile environment towards workers, and the ex-president nobly stepped in to deliver my speech in my absence. It was important that we got to say what we said about our early disappointment in the then recently installed UK government and its weak progress on delivering change for ordinary citizens in the first few months of taking office. We said that we must see the fine words of its manifesto turned into swift action. We said we must see the urgent realisation of Labour's promises to reverse the anti-worker, anti-trade union rhetoric, policy and legislation that the Tory government spent years crafting in the interest of profit and greed. And we said that, hailing from the land of Rabbie Burns, we know that the best laid plans o' mice and men gang after gley, but that after 15 years of the hostile environment towards workers, we simply cannae be left with naught but grief for promised joy from the new party of government in Westminster. That's what we said last September, and that's what we're saying again today. The UK government needs to get its priorities right. If it really wants to protect its citizens and our society, investment in public services and social security for social cohesion is how you do it. Tanks and bombs and submarines are weapons of destruction that we don't need more of, weapons that could cost us so much more than the money we spend on them, no matter what the warmongers say. You just have to know your history to understand where countries arming themselves to the teeth takes us as a human civilization. Welfare, not warfare, is what our people need and deserve. Let the UK government turn their efforts and their spending power to the fact that children UK-wide don't have enough to eat or to wear, don't have enough heat and power in their homes, and more so if they're part of a family that has more than 2 children. At TUC Congress, as Alan referenced yesterday, we put a question about the UK government's unwillingness to abolish the 2-child cap directly to the Prime Minister. And the question being put and the weak response about a task force made Sky News. We weren't the only ones asking that question, but we added our voice loudly to the rest, and the pressure on the UK government continues to mount to scrap this callous cap. The EIS can be rightly proud of our long-standing commitment to challenging poverty, wherever it stems from, and we're firm in our utter determination to keep challenging the political decisions that cause it. Later in September, I attended the Atlantic Rim Collaborative in Edinburgh as part of the Scotland delegation. The theme of the summit was attendance, belonging and excellence in teaching and learning, and I was asked to speak on a panel session as part of the Spotlight on the Scottish Education System Day about the views and experiences of Scottish teachers. So having been out of the classroom for 11 years, I went straight to people who were in the classroom still, members of our Education Committee, and I asked them 3 questions, the 3 questions that had been posed to me as a panel member. What do you love most about your job as a teacher? What does excellence in learning and teaching look like for you? And what do you need to be able to provide it? So I was really excited about putting something together on all of that. And then I went out to the members of the Education Committee with those questions, and then I took what they told me and made it into a bit of an acrostic poem, because they told me a lot, and I only had 5 minutes to present on what they'd said. Okay, so the poem that I put together should be up here now for you to have a look at. It's called Teachers Rock. There we are. So on its way. So we'll just leave that up there, because so much of what people have had to say from this platform, people have had to say at this lectern here, even sometimes this lectern here, reflects what is captured in here. And I want to thank all of the Education Committee members who sent me their thoughts, and I'm sure that everybody in this room will agree that teachers absolutely do rock. Yeah. we do, yeah. In October, we were taking on poverty again at the Standing Up to Child Poverty launch in Glasgow, where we did 2 things. One, we launched the new edition of the EIS Anti-Poverty Guidance for the Classroom, the follow-up edition to the widely welcomed and much used Face Up to Child Poverty. And 2, we launched the next phase of the EIS PAC project, which many of you will know is an EIS anti-poverty professional learning offer. Its origins are in an agreement between the former General Secretary of the EIS and a former Cabinet Secretary for Education, who's now First Minister of Scotland, at the 2017 International Summit on the Teaching Profession. And I set it up together with an advisory board that both Louise Hayward and Professor John McKendrick, whom some of you heard from yesterday, joined. They joined that advisory board when we were initially funded by the Scottish Government to develop and begin the project. And now, thanks to an AGM motion from a couple of years back, I think it came from Edinburgh and our sister over here, we fund and staff the project entirely under our own steam, with Equality Learning and Development Coordinator Erin McCauley making some headway on moving the project through its next phase. So please visit the PL stall if you'd like to learn more about this vital learning offer that we make to members. Anti-poverty work is absolutely core to the EIS mission. And if you'd like to learn more about professional learning more widely, talk to coordinators Pauline McColgan and Zoe McEwen, who'll be very happy to chat to you about all the brilliant opportunities that we make available to our members across the spectrum of PL interests. So I would commend the stall to you. November was quite a month too. I gave evidence to the Scottish COVID inquiry after months of careful preparation of written evidence based on hundreds, literally hundreds of pieces of primary evidence from the COVID years gathered from across all EIS departments. And this was a mammoth effort across all EIS departments, coordinated by Lee Meakin and written up by Anne Keenan, 130 odd pages of written evidence, and then forensic preparation of the witness, me, by Anne Keenan with her legal background. That was absolutely invaluable in preparing to do such a momentous thing on our behalf. And to take us to the point where I would speak on behalf of the EIS, answering questions from the Inquiry Team Council before Lord Brailsford. And as well as reporting on the experiences of teachers during COVID, I shared reflections on the lessons that need to be learned by government and employers from that whole experience. I said we need to go to work now, post-COVID and pre the next crisis, to ensure the inbuilt resilience of the education system. And that needs significantly greater investment in education today. And that's what our Stand Up for Quality Education campaign is all about. We need that investment for class size reduction, for more teachers, for workload reduction, for ASN provision, including multi-agency working, for equity of provision in respect of digital services and connectivity, for cash first free school meals provision, and for a qualification system that isn't largely dependent on a diet of externally marked exams, but that's rooted in the trust of teacher professional judgment. Because those were all the areas that we were found wanting as an education system during those COVID years. And I said that in the event of any future crisis, we needed leadership from the Scottish Government and national bodies in partnership with trade unions as the representative professional and industrial voice of teachers. We shouldn't be over there while they're in rooms in here deciding what will happen in terms of crisis response. I said that needs culture change underpinned by a set of principles that take full account of equity and equality considerations at the design stage, rather than be considered late in the day and after some of the damage has already been done because they didn't think of it soon enough. And I said, ultimately, that health, safety and immediate well-being must be the overriding priority, as is the law, above all other less pressing considerations, protection of life and health above and before absolutely everything else. And we look forward to the recommendations from that inquiry. And I should also highlight to you that we are now preparing very, very expansive evidence to submit to the UK COVID inquiry as well. So that has been a huge collective effort on behalf of us all in respect of reflecting our experiences over COVID and what needs to happen to prevent that type of in extremis situation again. December featured recruitment to more new posts that the Executive Committee and Council had approved as an outcome of the staffing review. And you may have seen in the recent edition of the SEJ that we have a significant number of new staff working in various roles within the EIS. And I want to say huge thanks to John MacLeod, not only for running of the many recruitment processes that have been underway around all of that, but for his skillful handling of the finances to put our funds to work hardest for us in the interests of members by recruiting additional staff to help us do all that we do on your behalf, to do it better, to do it deeper, to do it faster, all of the things that we were trying to achieve from the staffing review at the same time as look after the health and well-being of EIS staff. So thank you, John, for all that you've done to contribute to that. On into the start of 2025 in January, I was pleased to be involved in the culmination of the huge amount of work that's gone into supporting diversity of leadership within the Union on social justice, solidarity and internationalism, led by National Officer Selma Augustad. It was a real pleasure to be part of the Still We Rise conference in Glasgow, the first of its kind that the EIS has done, and where, as well as having been invited to address the conference and having prepared to do that, I did my homework in advance, prepared to do that, I also ended up doing an impromptu Colombian television media appearance, along with the Colombia delegation to the conference, thankfully, with the assistance of Alison Roy in comms, who found herself liaising with TV people in Bogota, and Paula Dixon, who not only is one of our very strong and recently expanded cadre of area officers, but is a fluent speaker of Spanish. What luck. Muchas bueno para mí in that instance. I'm doing Duolingo. And at the very end of that month, I contributed on our behalf to a Scottish Women's Convention conference on misogyny in education. And with threats to teacher numbers, still very, very live in the city of Glasgow, where I was speaking, and because I'd expected the Cabinet Secretary to be there listening to my speech, I said that women and girls are left safe in school when there are insufficient numbers of staff. I said that boys in school who have an instinct to direct misogynistic abuse at women and girls will find it much easier to do that when there are too few staff around at the time to prevent it, and not enough staff to engage with the boys in meaningful restorative dialogue afterwards to reduce the risk of them doing it again. We know that education staff and education are mission critical if we are to change misogynistic behaviours and make schools into safer work and learning spaces for women and girls. Education staff and the education that they provide are critical for the work that needs to be done with boys on their journey to becoming men. Otherwise, too many more of them will go on to commit serious acts of gender-based violence against girls and women in adulthood. They'll feel as entitled to coercively control or to rape a woman as they did to make a sexualised verbal threat or to a teacher or to grope a girl in school. Really, really serious consequences here. And I said that we need that system-wide approach to include a shared understanding of what's unacceptable behaviour and of the consequences that will occur where boys' treatment of women and girls is unacceptable. Girls and women need to see that our society and our education system cares about their safety, really cares about their safety and their rights as equal human beings, and boys need to see this too. To understand the risks to women and girls that misogyny poses, to understand the boundaries and that they are not entitled to cross them. This is a vital part of their education. And on into February, the President and I were arguing the case for quality education and CFE within an online colloquium debate, which is basically a network of academics who talk about a range of issues across the course of the year. And they wanted to talk about curriculum for excellence. Was it time to move on? And Alan and I, from our different perspectives, made the arguments as you'd expect and concluded that rather than move on from CFE, as the debate title suggested, we're still to get to our intended destination and everything that CFE was supposed to deliver. We said that rather than move on, we should get a move on towards that better educational future that CFE from 3-18 and critically from that 15 to 18 period promised, and on the shared understanding and agreement that a curriculum for excellence needs investment for excellence, and that's where we've fallen far short over the time since implementation. March took me to Iceland as part of the Scotland delegation to the International Summit in the Teaching Profession. Scottish Government being back in from the cold for the first time in 3 years meant that Scotland could properly participate this year. We got 3 good agreements from those discussions, critically. One focused on AI and the commitment to work together to create a set of ethical guidelines and guardrails on the use of artificial intelligence in education. And I pressed for that agreement because of the many reports that we were getting from all areas and parts of the Union, and that and what we were hearing in meetings about the Wild West, lawless approach to AI in a growing number of local authority areas. With the agreement reached, Andy Harvey and Leah Stalker are going to be taking that work forward for us with the Scottish Government, and we have asked of the Scottish Government that that be done at pace. Towards the end of April, I was part of a large EIS delegation to STUC Congress in Dundee. It was a busy one for me personally, with conference speeches, contributions to fringe meetings, and speaking as part of the International Workers' Memorial Day ceremony. But the delegation as a whole was incredibly busy, strongly contributing to debate across a raft of topics to reflect EIS policy, and our delegation was absolutely brilliant. Able, articulate, committed, impressive. They were a credit to the EIS and to the teaching profession amongst our fellow affiliates and our fellow trade unionists. They really were a joy to watch doing all that they did across the course of that Congress. Last month in May, I represented the EIS at a UCU rally outside Westminster, calling on the UK Government to protect higher and further education. I went there with a message of solidarity from our union to the UCU as its members fight cuts and for jobs in FE and HE the length and breadth of the UK, and with a message for governments north and south of the border that investment in further and higher education needs to be increased. That public funds need to be properly spent on quality education and on the educators who provide it, not squandered on eye-watering salaries for college and university principals. That public funds shouldn't be fueling competition, they should be enabling collaboration for the common good. not being channelled into the commodification of students. This model of commodified education is short-term, unsustainable, and ultimately ruinous of all that we as educators and as educated people hold precious. I went and delivered the message on our behalf, but had the assistance of Sarah Collins and David Belsey with the initial groundwork before setting off for London. And UCU members and speakers shared their solidarity with striking RGU members who by now have taken 5 days of strike action against compulsory redundancy. That's up in Aberdeen. I visited the picket line last week, and while I wasn't at all pleased at the weather, driving wind and rain off the North Sea, I was pleased to learn that the strike action is having something of an impact. We're now looking at 10 compulsory redundancies rather than the 30 originally proposed. But all of us on the picket line were clear that even one compulsory redundancy is not acceptable and will be fought tooth and nail by the EIS ULA and with the EIS right beside it. Solidarity with ULA members fighting compulsory redundancy. Last Saturday, I contributed to a seminar session at the Stand Up to Racism Summit in Glasgow. Colleagues, we understand that the prominence of the far right isn't a flash in the pan. It's not a flash in the pan. Social inequality and economic conditions are a breeding ground for racism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, and ultimately fascism. History teaches us that. So there's a lot to be done. There's a lot to be done by the whole trade union movement. There's a lot to be done by our union in contribution to that, to push back against the far right, to offer political education to our members and to support them to educate our students on misinformation and disinformation like the equality strategy has been seeking to do for the past year to 2 years. So really on point in terms of its framing that strategy. And government needs to do its bit too, by urgently creating time and space in the curriculum for quality learning and teaching that will equip our students with the knowledge, the skills and the attributes to protect themselves and one another from the dangerous influences of the far right, and to properly support the teachers who will be in the front line of delivering that vital education. And one of the other ISTP commitments that we managed to agree was in relation to that particular aspect, and we need to get busy on that really, really swiftly as well. And full circle, we're here again in June. So far, it's featured a contribution on Monday to a seminar at Glasgow University on assessment, accountability and quality. And we had a really strong EIS team, lay members and staff members, batting at that on all relevant aspects of EIS policy, on a reimagining of a senior phase in the vein of the Hayward recommendations, and on the imperative of teacher voice and time and space for teacher voice to be aired and shared in the curriculum improvement cycle work. On Tuesday, we launched the first major report in a series from the recent all-member survey, building on the work started by Leslie Warren a number of years back. And the survey itself was another massive undertaking, and we've had good media coverage of the outcomes in respect of workload. And that, of course, was timed quite strategically to link in with what we're about to do very, very shortly. Brian Cooper's been doing a great job in trialling new ways of maximising our media profile, along with the rest of the comms department, and we're hugely grateful to them for all that they do as well. On Wednesday, we continued our political lobbying on the amendments to the Education Bill. We've had some good wins on the draft legislation so far. 135 pages of amendments shared with MSPs, with many of those amendments getting traction, and then making it through the stage 2 debate and voting. So we've had a lot of wins there. We'll not go into them at the minute, but a lot of wins. But the ultimate test of our tolerance for this bill, and the ultimate test of whether it is actually going to do anything radical, other than just a simple rebrand, say, of the SQA, and maybe a wee bit of shifting of the goalposts in respect of inspection, the test will be at stage 3, and whether it's going to deliver anything like meaningful change. So we're looking at that very, very cautiously, very, very carefully, very forensically in terms of the detail of it. And we're going to, the Education Committee will make the ultimate decision about whether we give it our backing or whether we campaign, very vocally against it if it does get through the stage 3 process. But we're now back in Aviemore for this, our 179th AGM. 2 years ago, right here, we launched the Stand Up for Quality Education campaign. We launched it determined that we wanted to up the ante after more than a decade of fruitless discussions about crippling workload, not enough ASN provision, and rising levels of violent and aggressive behaviour in our schools. Over a decade of discussions with government, with employers and at the SNCT and in other political spaces about the unsustainable workload hampering the ability of the teaching profession to deliver the quality of education that CFE and a raft of policy and legislation committed us to. And that same workload making teachers unwell and turning prospective entrants to the profession in other directions. And more than a decade's worth of virtue signalling, stalling and gaslighting. A plethora of promises that raised false hope on class size reduction, on resources for inclusive education, on tackling bureaucracy, on class contact time reduction, layers and layers and layers of jam tomorrow, but tomorrow never coming. And everyday teachers are being let down, children and young people let down, communities and in fact our whole society being let down when we consider the power of education and investment in education for the common good, for social justice, for peace and for democracy. More than a decade's worth of disappointment might lead some to be downhearted, dejected, defeated. Not this union, not the EIS. With a history spanning 178 years, we are old, we are wise, and we are resolute. Our motto, coined in 1847, remains our mantra today for the advancement of teachers and the benefit of sound learning. We don't lie down when the times get hard and the going gets tough, because we've set the course and the coordinates for the next stage of our voyage as Scotland's biggest teacher trade union to be campaign strong and ballot ready in the face of the neoliberal forces that have sought to tighten their grip on public services and the staff who work in them, including in education. Slowly squeezing the life out of services and the energy out of workers, and then blaming teachers and school leaders and even local authorities for the fact that they're not firing on all cylinders when the scores appear on the doors after the various and vicious measures of scrutiny and performativity have been applied. Quality assurance and accountability drives from HMIE inspections to local authority mini inspections, and now even in school mini inspections. SNSAs, ACEL and SQA data collection to feed the insatiable NIF and Insight data machines, the national dashboards of data, all the while no one's keeping an eye on the fuel tank icon and the fact that the red light's on and it's been on for miles and miles and miles. Keep driving like that and the engine will lose power and the machine will grind to a halt. That's if it's not hijacked en route as it splutters along by the privateers. Defund and privatise. Defund and farm out to a trust like East Ayrshire Council is shamefully seeking to do with its instrumental music service. We're fighting those cuts. And with the help of Wendy Harty and led by the convener and vice convener of the INT network, we're working hard on resisting cuts to INT provision across Scotland, and we will keep doing that. Colleagues, that low investment, close scrutiny, high performativity and strong blame culture, we can see that right-wing ruse for what it is, even when it's been worked by self-declared left-of-centre progressive governments. And we've not been afraid to call it out and to fight back against it, to fight back fueled by all the strength of our collective moral purpose and from all the depths of our solidarity. And we have the confidence and the courage to stand up for our education services because we know why we're doing it. We know we can do it, and we know how to do it because we've done it before, numerous times, in fact, in the last decade. We've built good form in using our industrial muscle to win for our members and for our learners and for our students, where politicians and employers have failed over the last 10 years. In FE, in 9 years out of the past 10, with ballots, strikes and ASOS, Value Education, Value Teachers in 2017-18, a consultative ballot, a national billboard campaign, and 30,000 members and allies on the streets of Glasgow, and the notice of a statutory ballot. Pay attention in 22-23 with the first strikes by teachers on pay in 40 years, and most recently in the city of Glasgow, where a successful statutory ballot and the real threat of strike action by our members led to a reversal of the scandalous decision to cut 450 jobs from the teacher workforce. Go Glasgow. Yes. So we've won on pay, we've won on jobs, on deeming, and we can win again on workload reduction, on increased ESN provision, and on lowering the risk of violence and aggression as a serious health and safety issue at work. We can and we will, because we know there's power in this union to do it. And the thing is, employers and the Scottish Government know we've got the power and the know-how to push them hard for more and for better again. And it seems they don't really like that. They don't really like that. For all the talk of fair work, and remember Scotland was to be a leading fair work nation by 2025, and I wonder if any of you are feeling that fair work 6 months in. Colleagues at RGU certainly aren't. For all the fair work fanfare and magniloquence by the Scottish Government in a country where education is supposed to be valued, as the leading teacher trade union in Scotland, the representative voice of the profession, we are not being treated with the respect that should flow from that. And that's something that we need to keep demanding across the last 11 months of this government and whoever forms the next one. Fair work involves meaningful social dialogue between us as the representative voice of the profession and government on the critical issues that matter to our members. That's what respect and effective voice looks like. It's how we should be able to raise the issues that matter to our members about opportunity, about security of employment, and about when your class sizes are the size that they are, you've no support assistant despite 40% of the kids in your class having an additional need. There's just you to do everything for the learning, teaching and assessment of all of the young people in your class, including managing the increasingly challenging behaviour. Fulfilment at work is a pipe dream. And we know that things should and can be better, and we use our collective voice to say that. Government and employers would much rather we were quiet, deferential even, and just got on with things without complaint or criticism about the way that they're funding and running Scottish education. Staying stum about the fact that almost 20% of teachers are on precarious contracts and that over 80% of NQT primary teachers are on temporary contracts or are out of work. Saying nothing about the hours and hours of unpaid labour, the charity work, as I believe some LA secretaries are now calling it, that teachers are doing because the system is so understaffed. Not a peep about the ASN needs that are going unmet to the distress of thousands of young people and their families. And staying quiet about the fact that teachers increasingly are being hospitalised and left with life-changing injuries as a result of the violent behaviours that our schools don't have sufficient resources for interventions to prevent. Stay quiet in the face of that. No chance. Not possible. I'd respectfully ask the Scottish Government and COSLA, have you met the EIS? Have you met the EIS? Have you met our members? Have you met our officers and officials? Have you met our office bearers? Our salaries convener? Have you been to an EIS AGM? Shrinking violets, we are not. I was at the dentist recently, and the dentist told me I had a small mouth. I just had a bit of treatment, and so it was a bit of a lopsided smile that I had to myself as I thought of the Scottish Government and COSLA colleagues who'd probably wish that to be metaphorically true. EIS members and EIS staff stand up and we speak up. We say what needs to be said, and 2 years ago we launched this campaign determined to stand up and turn the heat up on government and employers to try to get them finally to do the right thing and up the investment in Scottish education as the only real way to address the manifold and interrelated issues that have been making the professional lives of teachers difficult, miserable even, and ultimately unsafe and unhealthy, dangerous actually, for years. Issues of underfunding that have been underserving our children and young people, particularly the most disadvantaged. That's the other facet of this too. And urgent though those issues are, we were clear that the Stand Up for Quality Education campaign would be a long-range, slow-burn campaign. We're trying to leverage millions and millions of additional funding into education here, so it's no mean feat. Last year, I reported to you on the progress of the campaign, an imminent Scottish Government behaviour action plan, and soon after the AGM, the action plan was published, but, critically, without the inclusion of the EIS logo, which we withheld because of the paucity of resources attached to the plan. Same as we said last year, all the documentation in the world is not going to solve a problem unless you attach the appropriate resources to it, and we're still waiting to see that. But the plan itself does have some useful content, and we've produced companion guidance for members in schools and local associations on how to use the Scottish Government's own words in its own action plan to leverage better policies and practices on behaviour at local level. And to the good, we've seen significantly increased reporting of violent incidents across a number of local authorities, and that's all really useful data to help us leverage better, safer provision in our schools. And this time last year, we'd also just published the joint ASN statement written by the EIS and signed by all of the other teaching and support staff unions, as well as parents' organisations, on the paucity of ASN provision. And this year, we've followed up with data analysis on ASN provision across local authority areas, building the case for greater investment that's needed if the 40% of children and young people with additional needs are to have their right to an education met equally to that of any other child or young person. We held an event at the Scottish Parliament focused on the gap between the promise of AN provision as captured in the legislation and the hard reality of the lack of it in the classroom. And the same day that that event took place, the Cabinet Secretary announced an additional £29 million for the recruitment of specialist ASN staff. And I'm absolutely convinced that without EIS campaigning, the extra money simply wouldn't have materialised. And £20 million is a welcome step in the right direction, but we are clear that the Scottish Government will need to dig much, much deeper than that. And we've been pressing hard on workload too. We made hay with the publication of the independent research on workload that was presented to the AGM last year. We met with the Cabinet Secretary on it, who, after some initial performative scepticism, admitted that it was compelling evidence and that workload was an issue that needs to be fixed. Meeting after meeting, we've highlighted the evidence, underscored the issues. Media appearance after media appearance, letter after letter to the Cabinet Secretary and to the First Minister. Final deadline set, final deadline missed, dispute declared, more meetings, and still no proposal as to how the manifesto commitments for workload reduction would be implemented. Or even any simple agreement that while it might be taking them a while, the 90 minutes will go to the preparation and correction component of the contract. We've compromised on timescales. We've said we can compromise on phased implementation, but the use of the time for preparation and correction is an absolute red line. Colleagues, we've said that from day one. We've said that from day one with calls on the Scottish Government in talking about this manifesto commitment. There are swathes of evidence now showing the extent to which teachers are subsidising the system with free work. We had education support here last year at our AGM, warning of the effects of long hours on physical and mental health. We have to take serious cognizance of that. Patience isn't infinite, and neither is the amount of time that teachers can give to their work away from their own families, their own children, their own partners, their own parents, and their own friends, and even their own company, because lots of you, I know, like to spend time in your own company as well. So we've come to the point where we must escalate this dispute, where we must ask our members to stand up and have their votes counted on workload in an indicative ballot. Colleagues, the time is now for us to use our industrial might to fight on workload and to push back on the conditions that are making too many of you and your colleagues miserable and many of you ill. It's time for us to deploy another facet of our democracy and open a consultative ballot on workload. If the meetings haven't managed to shift the will of government employers to act in the interests of fair work, if all the evidence hasn't convinced them to act, then it comes down to our industrial strength as a trade union to leverage fairer workload terms for teachers in Scotland. So the time is now, or just about. I'm going to signal the ballot open in just a few minutes, but I'm going to ask you first to help me a little bit with the proceedings around that. There's going to be a bit of a countdown. There we go. Some props. There we are. No, you're not in a 1970s game show. This is the 179th AGM. But yeah, as I said, I would like to help me with the countdown, which is going to appear on the screen behind us, I think. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.